He was a softly spoken Yorkshireman who lived in a quiet suburb of Bradford.
He worked at a time as a gravedigger, and he had this fascination with death and would want to open coffins.
But Peter Sutcliffe was leading a double life.
A member of his own family told me he would have killed the vicar's wife if he'd met her on a dark night.
He stalked his prey in the shadows of northern industrial towns. He said he had a mission to kill prostitutes, but no woman was safe.
Wives, mothers, daughters, it was absolutely terrifying time for women.
But how did this seemingly quiet married man become a savage serial killer? That's the subject of tonight's Making of a Monster. As a forensic psychologist, I've spent the last 10 years analysing the behaviour of killers, rapists and paedophiles. I've worked in prisons and secure hospitals, trying to understand what makes somebody capable of a truly monstrous act of violence. And sometimes, not just once, but over and over again.
To try to unravel the psychological profiles of dangerous convicts, Kerry has spent a decade researching and interviewing the most violent killers and criminals in Britain. Tonight, she's looking at one of the country's most notorious serial killers, Peter Sutcliffe.
This case sparked the most sensational manhunt of the 20th century. Few others would inspire so many headlines or so many hours of speculation. Here to talk to me tonight about the case is Dr. David Holmes, a fellow forensic psychologist, and Mark Williams-Thomas, a former detective and one of the country's leading crime analysts. But first, let's find out more about the crime. Tonight we get inside the mind of a man who terrorised women for over 5 years. In his own mind, he was a vigilante, cleansing the streets of fallen women. In reality, he was a ruthless murderer who enjoyed the act of killing and defiling the bodies of his victims. In the second half of the 1970s, a threat hung over the north of England. Women lived in fear of a man who seemed to be invincible. This killer would disappear from view, only to strike again when least expected. His methods were always the same. He struck his victims with a hammer on the head, and then some of the bodies were stabbed and slashed on the chest and neck. The first two known victims were prostitutes, and it didn't take long for the press to make links between these killings and the 19th century killings in Whitechapel. They came up with a name for the killer, the Yorkshire Ripper. Serial killers are not that common, so when the press got hold of the story, they had a field day. A local journalist who covered the Leeds-Bradford area and visited the sites of many of the murderers was Malcolm Hoddy.
It did start making the bigger papers, the national, the international papers. Some guy was over from the States and said, "Have you got any slab pictures?" I said, "Pardon?" He said, "Oh, in the States we'd have mortuary pictures." I said, "No, that don't happen over here." And another one, a German magazine, carried pictures of the weapons that he'd used.
They got an enormous amount of coverage, and of course the more murders there are, the more publicity you get. But it's not always helpful.
The attack started in the Leeds-Bradford area and extended along the M62 corridor into Manchester. In the north of England, no woman felt safe.
Wives, mothers, daughters, it was absolutely terrifying time for women. Whenever the phone went, you only thought, "Oh no, not another one."
In 1977, the Ripper's assaults were at their peak. In that 1 year, he killed 4 women and savagely assaulted 2 others. Those 2 women were lucky to escape with their lives, and only because he was disturbed in the act. The police were under huge pressure to get their man. Diane Simpson is an expert graphologist who was brought in by the police to investigate all possible leads.
It's been frequently said that Sutcliffe had been picked up and questioned many times. So had a lot of other people. Day in, day out, people went door to door to door to door. They were desperate. And they were working against the odds that police don't face now.
At the time, the police had a huge problem with the inquiry. They had masses of information coming in, which they had put on a card index system. There weren't any computers in those days.
It was 1980 before the police got their big break.
Often these things come about by good luck, and you could say it was just good coppery.
But Peter Sutcliffe was eventually called through routine police patrol work, and they saw a car in which was Sutcliffe with a woman, with a prostitute he picked up, who was most certainly going to be his next victim. They made some inquiries, and they found the car was under a false registration. The number given should have been on a Skoda motor car. In fact, it was on a Ford. And they arrested him. One of the officers then took his own initiative, went back to the scene, and searched round the car, and he found a hammer and a knife, which was Sutcliffe, the tools of his trade as a multi-murderer.
By the time of his arrest, 13 women were dead. Another 10 had been savagely attacked and narrowly escaped death themselves. As if this was not shocking enough, it was revealed that he had been questioned by the police no less than 9 times in relation to the Ripper killings, and each time he'd been eliminated from their inquiries. Mark, the case of the Yorkshire Ripper, well, first of all, at this stage, should we even be calling him the Yorkshire Ripper? Don't you think that these titles give criminals some sort of power and status? In actual fact, they don't really warrant.
Well, I think, yes, they do. They do give them power and status, but I think what we've got to look at is the public, and most importantly, the media like to label somebody. What's more important is, why do we remember Peter Sutcliffe and none of the victims?
That's very true. Actually, all the media hype, and in many ways the police investigation, didn't gain momentum until after they noticed that Sutcliffe was in fact murdering not just prostitutes, but, as the police constable called them, innocent women. So David, are some victims equal but more equal than others?
No, they're not. And there is a phrase that's often used in this context called less than dead, in that perhaps a middle-class victim whose reasonable profile, a decent person seen by the public, would be dead, and they have a name, and may, be equated almost with the person who actually kills them. But some victims are seen as less than that.
Do police officers investigate the killings of prostitutes in the same way as they would investigate a white middle-class person who
Well, it
murdered?
didn't seem that they did in this case. It seems that actually they attached a high-profile detective to lead the inquiry, didn't they? As soon as Sutcliffe killed a 16-year-old shop assistant.
Yes, and then when you get a victim who is the public are empathic with, the public recognises one of their own, then all of a sudden it has to be taken seriously, both by public and to some degree by the police, although the police will say, no, we investigate every crime in the same way, but you can see, overtly, that this is not the case.
I think that when you think about serial killers, Peter Sutcliffe really is one of the most notorious. It really was a landmark case for many reasons. And looking at the investigation, not to put too fine a point on it, it was a bit of a cock-up, wasn't it? Why was it so important? Why was it such a landmark case in terms of investigative lessons learnt?
Well, I think, first of all, Peter Sutcliffe himself featured 9 times, was investigated and interviewed 9 times as part of the investigation, and there was no correlation that existed. Bearing in mind, 22,000 statements were taken as part of the investigation. That's an incredible amount of information, and if you think each part of each statement has to be analysed, where do you put that information?
To be honest, when you reach the situation of many rooms full of paper, cannot possibly be cross-referenced. And in smaller investigations, police officers may correlate from memory that there was something somewhere. With the size of this investigation, it was impossible. The reason it was a landmark case was that following that, radical changes were made to the entire system in bringing in computers for the first time. The Holmes system was actually based on the problems of the Ripper case. And further to that, the idea of perhaps using psychological profilers to examine scenes, to do crime analysis, became suddenly more important.
What would a profiler, looking at the crimes of the Yorkshire Ripper, look at the first 3 cases, what could we learn from that?
We could learn a lot, because needless to say, these actual victims survived, and there may have been residual bits of memory. To reconstruct these cases carefully, to see how the person operated, what they must have been walking around doing, what they must have been carrying with them, those kinds of things make predictive things that you can actually use on the street to pick up, more carefully potential suspects.
I think it would be quite interesting from an offender profiling point of view is there are 2 types of offender profiling. You've got your geographical offender profiling and your behavioural offender profiling. And I think in relation to Peter Sutcliffe, it would have been interesting to have looked at it from a geographical point of view.
Well, that hadn't been born, had it, at that time? Actually, if you look at just the geography of the first 3 known offences, Peter Sutcliffe lived literally in the middle of the triangle that they formed.
Would have come out very easily in geographical profiling. In fact, the most crude forms of profiling initially. If this had been applied, the amount of effort required to locate this chap would have been absolutely minuscule by comparison to what happened.
In terms of offender profile, behavioural profiling. What is the method of the killings telling us?
Well, and this one becomes very complicated because, of course, his defence later on in court was that he'd received the voice of God which had told him to go and kill prostitutes, etc. The point being is that actually he didn't kill prostitutes, and he would have known very clearly that some of his victims were not prostitutes.
Well, actually, his first victims weren't even linked, were they, to the Ripper, because they weren't prostitutes.
And he changed his offending behaviour slightly, so much as his initial victims, he actually lured into the car through picking them up as prostitutes, took them to a location, killed them, or attempted to kill them. He then moved on and became more of a predator, in so much as he would follow them walking down the streets, and then go behind them and smack them over the head with the hammer, etc. As the most sophisticated serial killers, they start off very crudely, with sort of fairly basic methods, but then refine and improve as their career progresses. And needless to say, there is feedback as well. I mean, if someone is suddenly starting to be called the Ripper, then all the connotations from the past are kind of given to them like some kind of cloak of attention, getting behaviour. And in that way, it could be fueling it. And it has to be said, taking a step back, that kind of press, and that kind of coverage, and that kind of furore may have actually encouraged Sutcliffe to a great deal to actually increase and continue, and perhaps give him some kind of direction as to what kind of victims he might be looking for.
Well, I think it's time for us to move away of this concept of the Ripper and actually look at the man behind the label. What do we know about Peter Sutcliffe and his background? Over a 5-year reign of terror in the 1970s, Peter Sutcliffe killed 13 women. 10 more were savagely attacked with a hammer, a screwdriver and a knife. But what had gone on in Sutcliffe's background to create this rage against women? And how did he get away with his crimes for so long? Peter William Sutcliffe, referred to in the press as the Yorkshire Ripper, was born in Bingley near Bradford, the oldest of 6 children.
Peter Sutcliffe had a rather unbalanced relationship with his parents because they were very different. His father was very much, I suppose you'd like to have seen himself as a man's man. He was a hard-drinking womanizer, and also was brutal at times. He would beat his wife and the children. At school, he certainly wasn't one of the boys. He tended to be a loner. He would, in the playground, he would tend to be by himself in a corner and just didn't mix with people. And this is something that sort of carried on for many years. He wasn't one with a big group of friends.
On leaving school, he lacked focus, and his problems with timekeeping meant that he was unable to keep a job for long. He had a number of menial jobs, one of which was digging graves in Bingley Cemetery. Peter Sutcliffe had never had a girlfriend, but in 1967 he met Sonia, and they married in 1974. At that time, Peter was training to be a lorry driver, and Sonia hoped to be a teacher. They seemed like the archetypal happily married couple. They bought a house in Heaton, a quiet suburb of Bradford, where the neighbours only saw him as a quietly spoken and caring husband. But by this time, Sutcliffe was leading a double life. By day, he was a happily married man, but by night, he was cruising the red light areas in search of prostitutes.
At one stage, she saw Sonia talking to another man, and he assumed from that she was having an affair. So, if you like, in retaliation, he went out and found a prostitute. She conned him out of some money, and then she humiliated him in public when he went into a pub and saw her there, and sort of wanted his money back, and she publicly humiliated him. And that may well have been the start. It's believed that he went out looking for her with some sort of weapon, I think a rock in a sock or something, and was going to take revenge. And that made the first sort of signs that he may have been building up to actually do violent acts against prostitutes.
That was just the start of his attacks on women, and the violence would escalate. Over the next 5 years, Peter Sutcliffe would leave 10 women with injuries that would last for the rest of their lives, and he would kill 13 more. Examination of his handwriting in the period just before he committed the murder led to a startling discovery.
His writing is very consistent, very ordinary writing, but repeatedly there was a 3-day change in the writing. The pressure will become more erratic. There were odd formations in the writing, like a double-cross T-bar, like as though his hand was not controlling little pen lifts, almost as though he had a slight tremor. And it got increasingly worse over a 3-day period. The 4th day, as the dates proved, was the day he went out and attacked someone.
Despite his acts of depravity, he was able to get away with murder for 5 years. Even though he was questioned by the police on many occasions, he persuaded them of his innocence. So how was he able to deceive people for so long? Simpson has spent over 400 hours talking to Sutcliffe and knows him well.
This is the nice guy on the train, the soft-spoken, smart, not some sort of Neanderthal that would kill, but of course in reflection, that's how he got away with it. This was Mr. Nice. He was soft-spoken, pleasant to talk to, but every so often you got a glimpse of something else. One day, he decided to tell me that the girls hadn't known what had happened. They didn't know that the death was painless. Now, I knew otherwise. I'd seen photographs. I know some of the girls tried to get away. This was, I suppose, his whitewashed image of what he'd done. He doesn't have the capacity to understand. He has no empathy.
Sutcliffe's defence was that he wanted to rid the streets of prostitutes, but the brutality of his attacks suggests that actually he was enraged against all women. Where do you think this rage came from, David?
Well, clearly Sutcliffe was very tied into his mother, as is the case with many of the
He
killers.
loved his mother, didn't he? There was no
He was
indication that he
bonded
hated
to his mother. He wasn't so much...
Unhealthily so?
Probably very unhealthily.
Why being bonded to your mother would make you rave?
Yeah, how would blame the mum,
The
don't we?
inability to step out and engage with other females, which is a natural progress. You move from your mother to other females.
So an inability to separate.
Yes, I think he could only see either, it was a bit of a Madonna whore thing, but really he could only see the perfection of his mother, if you like, and pushed against something like prostitution, where he could, to some degree, let loose some of the rage, and some of the indicators were there. And it's curious that...
Where does the rage come from? Why would he be so enraged
he was
towards women?
greatly inexperienced with females, and I don't think he actually responded to them in the same way. I think he had difficulty in all
How
sex.
they had a very active sex life, although it was very clinical. She always made sure that there was towels on the bed when they had sex. Those types of details. So there was certainly a sexual relationship that was going on with Sonia. I think the control that she had over him was very important. But again, it does pose that question about the amount of knowledge she had. Did she really not know that he didn't have any involvement with prostitutes?
Well, it seems that many of his friends did. It was something that he didn't necessarily brag about.
But he never hid the fact that he was overtly aggressive with prostitutes, that he would denigrate them, that he would use them quite regularly.
Well, many men do use prostitutes. Do you think that it's relevant that it's reported that he had a bad experience with a prostitute? One particular prostitute didn't give him change from the £10 note of the 70s that he paid her, and also went into a pub and humiliated him.
I think humiliation could be a key factor, because that could build into a rage, which could then possibly have affected subsequent experiences with prostitutes, and as some kind of,
So you act out your rage, you kill a prostitute, and then that's the end of it.
I think the general attacks that preceded may have actually been more symptomatic of what was going on. I think his actual inability to separate out his ability to use prostitutes to vent his rage or the dark side of him to some degree and keep it away from his marriage, I think grew into something more than that. People always want to look for a positive thing that happened. I don't mean a nice thing, I mean something that you can look at and say, look, that emanates from that. Well, in his case, you've got to realise that it is possible that an absence of something can equally become a vacuum that can create this kind of need or start this kind of need rolling. And in his case, there was a distinct absence of any interest in normal relationships, whether they be male or female.
From what Mark says, it actually wasn't a complete absence, was it?
Yeah, I mean, he had a very good relationship with his wife.
Yes, but only once he had kind of met his wife and once he started to use prostitutes. Prior to that, during adolescence, when people normally would have had some interest, he seemed to have none. And I think that vacuum was a dangerous indicator of what happened later.
So that kind of, I mean, there's loads of people out there that don't have relationships. Do they become serial killers?
But then again, not everyone who picks up a hammer becomes someone who cracks a
So he stands alone, and I'm not sure, this goes back to the point of, being an ex-policeman, and this is where I disagree so often with psychiatrists, psychologists, who try and explain it. I mean, why do we have to explain why he's done his behaviour? He's done his behaviour. We can't fight back to the fact of, Mum didn't look after him very well when he was young. He had a bad relationship with his
I
dad.
guess we want to understand it so that we can predict the next Peter Sutcliffe, which obviously brings with it all kinds of
I think
problems.
Mark has actually tapped onto something which I was trying to get around to, is that we are looking for some kind of clue that says, he did this. I think with Sutcliffe there was basically an absence, and what it was a foot in the door. He started to do something and started on a path which other people didn't. And that was a path of violence towards females, particularly at this time prostitutes. And that is what escalated bit by bit. He learned this path.
We said before, didn't we, that actually many of his victims weren't prostitutes, and his first victims, crucially, were not prostitutes. So doesn't that suggest that there's a general misogyny?
Yes, albeit they were lone women on their own, weren't
Do you think that he viewed any woman who was out on her own after, say, 9 o'clock at night must be a prostitute?
I don't think prostitutes. You see, I don't think prostitutes is what's key here. I think the fact that they were women, they were on their own, and it goes back to this point of I'm not interested, and I really don't think, I don't think it's any use saying, let's try and analyse why someone's going to become a killer. Every single serial killer kills for different reasons.
Well, the ones that we're going to look at today do have great similarities, and it may be interesting to take a step back and actually examine that, and examine your statements, as it were, in that perhaps there may be some kind of profile, albeit fairly complex, that does indicate on a scale of how likely you are to have this tendency. Whether you act on it or not, whether you take that first step, can be another crucial factor, but the fact you have the potential in the first place may be a reason for monitoring, etc., and may be useful in the future.
So much research has been done by looking at people who commit serious crime, people who don't commit crime, and the similarities that sit between the two is often very, very close. So you can't say, well, this person commits a crime. If we were saying these types of people commit crime, it'd be very easy to detect crime, wouldn't it?
Perhaps if we get around to doing brain scans when people are 3 years old, it might just work.
Oh, that's terrible. You'd label a 3-year-old. I know. Why don't we?
People have in the past.
Why don't we take a look at some similar cases and see if there's any lessons that we can learn from them? Tonight we're looking at the case of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. Deliberately taking a life is a terrible crime, but what can drive somebody to kill over and over again? Serial killers are fortunately rare, but when they do strike, their cases are always high profile and always shocking. Perhaps one of the most notorious was the case of a seemingly respectable small-town GP who was popular with his patients and a family man. But Harold Shipman was to become Britain's most prolific serial killer. With some cases still under investigation, it's thought that his list of victims numbers around 250. So how did this man get away with murder for so long?
Old ladies were his victim group, and he got away with it for many years. I suppose that way you could say that they're likely to have some sort of illness underlying their normal condition. I mean, if he started killing young people, I think it would have been noticed far more quickly.
He might have told people he was giving them flu jabs or something. We don't really know. But whatever, we do know that he was good at gaining his patients' confidence, particularly the elderly females, and by that means managed to get a needle into them and inject them morphine.
But Shipman made his big mistake when he killed his final victim, Kathleen Grundy. Kathleen was a former mayor of Hyde and a very active 81-year-old.
It was only subsequently, because the daughter noticed that the will was forged, did the police actually do something and quickly realised something was not right.
Kathleen's body was exhumed, and it was discovered that she had a toxic level of diamorphine in her body.
This elderly lady was particularly fit. She had no real discernible natural disease other than the changes of ageing. In particular, she didn't really have any significant coronary artery disease at all. And samples taken from that lady were analysed and were found to contain morphine in lethal levels.
Investigating other dubious deaths at Shipman's practice revealed that Kathleen hadn't been the first he'd killed. As bodies were exhumed and tested and records investigated, a chain of deception was revealed.
I think the reason Harold Shipman got away with killing people for so long was simply because he was a doctor. He was in a position where he could kill people by use of medicines, and he was held in great respect. He was clearly liked as a apparently caring general practitioner.
When the police started to investigate mysterious deaths, more and more came to light. In the end, they were able to build a case and charge him with the murder of 15 of his patients.
He saw himself as someone who was right, could not be argued with, and just totally denied it all the way through. He was faced with a very, very long time in prison, probably till he died. And one of the things that he displayed in this sort of arrogant attitude is that he was the one in control and in charge, and therefore he was taking the ultimate step of being in charge by taking his own life.
The murders didn't attract the same sort of headlines as those of the Yorkshire Ripper. The details were far less sensational, but still the death count was much, much higher. People were asking, what could have possibly motivated him to do it?
He seems to have started this fascination with drugs, with morphine-based drugs, when his mother was dying. In his teens, his mother had lung cancer, and she seemed to get a lot of relief in the latter stages of her illness from injections of morphine.
Shipman may have been Britain's most prolific serial killer, but he was not the most gruesome. This innocuous flat hid a dark and terrible secret. It was the home of Dennis Nielsen, another horrific serial killer. A seemingly mild-mannered man, Nielsen enticed a series of young men back to his flat in Muswell Hill. There he murdered them, keeping their bodies for company before cutting them up and disposing of them.
He seemed a very normal young man of 38. He was a civil servant, and he seemed to be as other civil servants were. He obviously was a loner, and one of the ways in which he made friends was interviewing young men for jobs at the job centre. He got to find out that they had no families that cared anything about them, and then he befriended them.
He was only caught after neighbours complained that their toilets were backing up. When the drains man came round to clear it, body parts were found. Nielsen had been flushing them down the toilet.
He strangled them, and then to make sure they were dead, he drowned them. And then he buried them under the floorboards of his flat. And when he wanted to have some sexual activity, he took them out and did his sexual activity with the dead corpse. He powdered them, and when they got too smelly, he cut them up and boiled the heads and the feet and the hands and buried them or burnt them in the garden.
All in all, Nielsen killed 15 men. They were mainly vulnerable people, homeless men and prostitutes. Dennis Nielsen claimed that he only killed the men to stop them from leaving him, and after their deaths, he became obsessed with the bodies. After psychiatric evaluation, Nielsen's defence expert said that he had a narcissistic false self syndrome, and was therefore not responsible for his crimes. The prosecution expert agreed he was manipulative and had an abnormality of mind.
It's quite horrific. If you're a barrister, you're hardened to these sort of things, I'm afraid, particularly if you do murders and you have to go into the detail of people's inner parts. But I had to break off every so often when I was reading the papers and go out and get a breath of fresh air, because even for me it was sort of quite sickening.
In the case of Nielsen, the judge instructed the jury that a mind can be evil without being abnormal. They returned a guilty verdict on all counts. David, when you look at these three cases, we've got Shipman, Nielsen and Sutcliffe. Actually, they appear quite differently, don't they? At first blush, they seem actually quite separate, but I know from the assessments that I've done of serial killers, which thankfully have been few, that they've got a lot of similar...
Yeah.
They've got similar pathology, don't they?
Yeah, like hands together in all sorts of dimensions. I mean, for a start, they all three have necrophilic tendencies. They all have kind of a relationship with dead people to some degree.
Is that going too far with Harold Shipman?
Absolutely not. No, he would stay with his victim after the death. I mean, the whole fixation with his mother's death and the perpetuation of that throughout his killing career, his relationship with death, if you like, was a very important factor in how he actually developed.
Didn't he stay with the bodies, though? Because he was expected to. He was there in the role of GP, wasn't he? Often he'd be certifying the death.
This legitimises the idea that he can remain with the dead person and feel totally in control, and totally in control of that person's existence. But there are other aspects that are similar. When we say that they had a relationship with the fact that they were dead, you know, many of the victims that Peter Sutcliffe killed, he killed and then he disappeared. Okay, he stayed with them, for some of them, for a number of hours afterwards, or minutes afterwards. But that doesn't mean to say... It's so simple to say, you know, this person connected with this person connected with this. I think the reality is that every single one of these had character traits of someone who is perfectly normal and is never killed.
In terms of these three killers, something that strikes me is that Peter Sutcliffe, you know, it is a hierarchy, and there shouldn't be, but there is a hierarchy of killers. Peter Sutcliffe is up there, isn't he? Whereas when you look at the death toll, Harold Shipman kills 250 people, we estimate.
He made far fewer waves over his killings.
Why do you think...
He's the most notorious, you know, as far as amount of victims.
No, he is.
No, he is in the amount of people that he's killed.
In terms of the headlines that it generates, in terms of public fear, just in in terms of how much people talk about cases.
From a media point of view, absolutely right. You know, there are other people out there who coin far more, headlines than Harold Shipman does.
Is that because we find his crimes somewhat easier to stomach because they don't involve stabbing, slashing, screwdrivers,
the idea of less than dead that we mentioned before, where it comes to the fore here with Harold Shipman, in that these are the least dead. These are elderly ladies who would be expected to pass away and therefore were just simply not noticed as murder victims. And therefore it's very easy for this pattern to continue. And he was prolific. He did have the excuse to visit many, many potential victims with all that he would require to carry out the killings.
And I suppose the method of killing as well, it's not a agonising, long drawn out.
Possibly the least painful deaths of all.
It
comes down to the violence, it comes down to the way that he behaves with them. He didn't do anything to them to degrade them as individuals, having killed them, or as part of the killing process. Peter Sutcliffe took their clothes off them, he inserted screwdrivers into parts of their body. Nielsen cut his victims up. So when you look at Harold Shipman as an offender, it's a far less gruesome offence than it is when you look at Nielsen and Sutcliffe.
How important is power and control as something which drives all of these men?
In these three cases, power and control are very, very important. And a strange perverse sexuality as well in each case.
In
each case, yes. In the case of Sutcliffe, you have, obviously attacking the various parts of the body and the choice of victim and the venom against women. There's clearly a sexual side to that. With Nielsen, his victims were picked up on the basis of sexuality, and he did have forms of relations with the court system. And needless to say, as we move on to Shipman, there was a sense of power, control, and his form of sexuality, which was quite minimal, really, was in that sense of control. I think what drove him on, I have Shipman down as being a form of Munchausen by adult proxy.
What was Shipman's perversion? I can buy Sutcliffe and I can... His perversion was what?
His perversion was that he actually saw his victims as being ill people who required his assistance in the same way that his mother required the assistance of their GP to put her out of her pain and misery. And he saw himself in that role every time he struck a victim. And that comes under a kind of definition of Munchausen by adult proxy.
Well, I don't think it's a perversion, is it? Certainly not what I would understand a perversion to be. Nielsen and Sutcliffe quite clearly fall into that category. I think Shipman's a completely different character.
We cannot let him off because he killed his victims nicely. He killed prolifically.
But this is where we come back to the problem. We're trying to link all three of them together. Why he killed his victims, I don't know. I don't think he was perverted in the way he killed. Clearly, Sutcliffe was, and most clearly Nielsen was.
I still say that Shipman was, and the way that he did it, just because the modus actually involved morphine and it was, if you like, a clinically painless death, does not mean to say that he didn't have malice involved in this, and he didn't have some repressed violence. He was a very repressed, violent person, as shown, his early days on the rugby field. But that, I think, expressed itself in the cold, controlled, and sustained way he continued to eliminate large numbers of the local population.
Well, why don't we go back to the case of Sutcliffe? After the break, we'll be looking at what happened at trial. In the case of Peter Sutcliffe, everyone was appalled by the extent of the violence towards his victims. It would be easy to conclude that it must be the work of a madman, but just how responsible was he for his actions? After his arrest, there was a wave of public anger aimed at the man who'd killed 13 women and brutally attacked 10 more. People imagined he would be instantly recognisable as the psychopathic monster of the papers, but the reality was very different. When the police questioned the man they'd brought to Dewsbury police station, they were surprised by him.
He was quite happy to start with to confess that he was the man they were looking for, and then came about this his account of hearing voices which were telling him to do it, and I think he was quite matter-of-fact about it. But you can't get away from the fact that he went out prepared, armed with a hammer and a knife for what he was going to do, and then because he was relying on the defence saying because he'd been told by God to do it, then he wasn't doing wrong.
Sutcliffe claimed that when he worked as a gravedigger in Bingley Cemetery, he started to hear voices from God. They were telling him to kill prostitutes. He claimed that after he heard them, he went through terrible stages and was in absolute turmoil.
He would say he had an uncontrollable urge. On one side, I accept this. Serial killers per se appear to have this hunger to do what they did. This uncontrollable urge never came over him in front of a uniformed policeman.
According to Sutcliffe, even the police errors were actually messages from God that he was on the right track. After all, he was questioned and released 9 times. Why else could that be, if not divine intervention? Although, during his 26-hour-long confession, Sutcliffe never even mentioned the incidents at Bingley Cemetery that supposedly set him off on his divine mission. And despite saying that he was relieved to have been captured, he'd certainly done his best to avoid detection. He'd not only hidden his hammer behind a water tank before the police took him, he used the same excuse of needing the toilet to hide a knife in a cistern at the police station. As part of the Voices from God defence, it was important that Sutcliffe stressed that the killings weren't sexually motivated, something that he continued to maintain despite evidence that he'd had sex with one of his victims.
It was sexually orientated. He'd made himself a uniform to wear under his trousers to enable him to masturbate more easily, and this he would don before setting out. So this was not a man walking along the street thinking, oh, there's a wicked woman. This was a man who literally had gone out dressed to kill. A member of his own family told me he would have killed the vicar's wife if he'd met her on a dark night.
Sutcliffe had already admitted to the murders, but claimed that he was not in his right mind at the time. At his trial, 3 separate consultant forensic psychiatrists diagnosed him as being paranoid schizophrenic. What it amounted to was, if the jury believed his story that he had heard the voice of God, he would be guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. If not, it was murder.
Well, there was an agreement between the parties that were to accept the plea to manslaughter. The trial judge, Mr. Justice Borum, would have none of it and insisted it went ahead with a trial for murder, and he was convicted.
In the end, the jury decided by a majority of 10 to 2. Peter Sutcliffe was sane and guilty of murder. Sutcliffe was sentenced to life imprisonment.
He amazed me at one point by saying he thought some of the victims' families were, and I quote the word, vindictive. Because they sort of couldn't see that it was a miscarriage of justice, that he was there and they should understand he couldn't help it. And I felt that vindictive was very far from an appropriate word. I put it to him. He'd rendered 26 children motherless. But he felt they'd be better off without their mothers.
You know, he was a monster. He was, to my mind, a cold, calculated killer. He must have known what he was doing. Must.
But were the jury right? In only 3 years, Sutcliffe had been diagnosed as schizophrenic again, and he was moved from Parkhurst Prison to Broadmoor Hospital. Mark, does it appear that actually there was a miscarriage of justice in this case, and it's been proven that in fact he was mentally ill?
I think not, no. And actually, I think this was a landmark case, certainly from a criminal justice point of view. And the judge very clearly said that we should let the jury decide whether or not this person is mad or whether or not he was in control of himself.
But wasn't it inevitable that the jury were going to fall down on the side of he is bad? Because there's been such a furore over the case. Didn't the public want their pound of flesh? Was the judge actually just pandering to the media, pandering to the public opinion?
The judge made absolutely the right decision and was very strong in making that decision to say, no, it should be a trial. The days before the trial, you know, he was very easily able to accept a manslaughter. Everyone would have accepted that because Sutcliffe accepted the guilt of having committed the murders. And it was really important that he went ahead, had a jury case, the jury came back. I don't believe it was foregone that they were going to decide it was murder. After all, the evidence that was presented by the psychiatrist and everything was suggesting otherwise.
Well, the psychiatrists were unanimous, weren't they, in saying that he was presenting with symptoms of schizophrenia. He said that he was hearing voices. He said, I'm not a monster. I was on a mission from God.
And you have to realise that although he presented with many, many symptoms of schizophrenia, there were no signs of schizophrenia whatsoever. And you do not get symptoms without signs.
Well, explain that for people who don't...
In this case, it's very important to understand that a symptom is something that you tell someone you have. I have a headache, yeah? A sign is like you've got a nail sticking in your head, therefore I can tell. There were no signs, there was no, I mean, classically with schizophrenic individuals, you'll see them distracted and muttering to the voices, etc. This thing never happened.
Police did comment that actually he did appear somewhat disordered at times. He would flit from one topic to another.
I think most people lying do that, yes. I think the idea that being distracted on keeping track of the story. It's not a sign of schizophrenia, it's a sign of someone who is lying.
Is it that we're just resistant to thinking that this person actually could have a mental illness?
No, I think it's quite the other way around. I think that what we want is that a person should have an excuse. We don't want to think that Joe Bloggs next door could go around and do the kind of things that Sutcliffe did. What we'd like to think is there is something wrong with him, therefore we can feel safe, because it's only people that have got something wrong with them that can do that.
After all, evidence was presented. They could very easily have gone with eminent psychologists, psychiatrists who came up with very, very clear definitions about them thinking that he was hearing voices from God, but no, they went along with the fact that he went out and he calculated it.
The prosecution case was based on the fact that actually these offences had a very clear sexual element, and therefore if he was just ridding the streets of prostitutes, wouldn't he have done it in a more cool, a more clinical way?
This idea, I mean, you haven't mentioned that, the idea of being schizophrenic was that the voice of God had told him to carry out these killings. And that all the evidence of the killings, and particularly the kind of weird kind of trouser thing that he was wearing, which subsequently emerged, would indicate that there was a massive sexual motive here. This person was not ridding the...
He rapes a number of these things.
Yes, he was not ridding the world of horrible women. He was actually carrying out very sexual acts.
Are the two necessarily mutually exclusive? Why do we expect logical behaviour if we're saying that somebody might possibly have a mental disorder?
There was nothing weird about his pattern of behaviour. There was nothing very strange or psychiatric about his behaviour. It was very purposeful, very psychopathic, and the only time that he ever appeared to have symptoms of schizophrenia was when he was interviewed by the psychiatrist.
But yeah, I mean, 5 psychiatrists, and even the psychiatrist who'd seen him the day before, who read the report, came up and said he presented himself, and within 30 minutes I knew that he was he had mental illness. Well, what this proves is actually we've got psychiatrists out there who are assessing people, and at the end of the day, they know no more than you and I know.
He's currently still in Broadmoor Hospital. He's currently still being treated over 30 years on. Could somebody malinger for that length of time? And actually, psychiatrists and psychologists, they are trained to look things that your lay person is not. They're trained to ask the right kind of questions.
But they don't follow him around day after day. Police officers do.
Certainly in relation to Peter Sutcliffe, a lot of the interviews that were done with him. He provided explanations on the basis of that. That's where they came up with their conclusion. Things have moved forward massively now. We use the whole circumstances that sits behind why someone commits an offence, and I'm not sure that was done very well in those days.
Of course, there's nothing to say that actually he couldn't have developed a mental illness.
Possibly as a result of being in prison,
Possibly as a result of being in prison, possibly as a result of, we know, don't we, that killers get traumatic symptoms after offences. You can literally be driven mad by your own actions. But also, isn't it possible that he might have been mentally ill at the time of his offences, but in actual fact, that wasn't related to those offences at all? They're entirely separate things.
Yes, I mean, one of my main contentions is the idea that if someone has a mental illness, it must have a direct import on the actions that they take in order for it to actually be taken into any kind of consideration. Because, having, some kind of mental illness which says that it doesn't affect your judgments, then you try and use it to say that that person, entirely due to that mental illness, carried out heinous acts, went out, premeditated, with hammers, etc. I don't accept it.
Of course, if we move away from Peter Sutcliffe, the amount of people who are in prison with high mental illness is a massive percentage. So, there are lots of people in prison who are suffering from mental illness. One of the reasons Sutcliffe was moved to Broadmoor was for his own safety.
Is he mad or is he bad? That's the question I'm asked regularly as a forensic psychologist. In my view, it's not a useful dichotomy. It's sensible to say that to varying degrees, people are a little bit of both. Perhaps in the case of Peter Sutcliffe, we'll simply never know.